The second piece that I figured I'd share some thoughts on is in the section around optimizing. How are you optimizing what works? And this starts with investing in both your product and your organization in equal parts. It's so interesting. We often seek customer feedback. We're obsessed with iterating and improving our products and our services, but we tend to underinvest in our team. We will A/B test to the wazoo product that we have in the world, but we won't A/B test the way we work. We won't say, hey, for the next 2 weeks, let's no longer meet Tuesday morning just because it's Tuesday, and then let's determine whether that was more productive or less productive, and if it's worse, revert to the previous version, and if it's great, adopt it and do another test. We don't debrief what's really gone wrong, typically. We just fix it. And we very seldom debrief what went right, so we could actually learn what is so reproducible and important to preserve for the next time we do something. And so it's an interesting dilemma. Like, how do you make sure that you're investing in equal parts? I'm remembering the first year that I was working with Ben Silbermann, who is the founder of Pinterest, and I remember checking in with him like 6 or 7 months after he pivoted the previous version of his company into Pinterest. And I asked him what's your roadmap for the next year? I was just curious what he was planning on doing, and I was expecting to hear a list of features that might hit the site or major product objectives. But instead, he just looked at me and said, my only focus for the next 6 to 12 months is to improve our processes. And I just was curious about that, because first of all, it seemed like the wrong objective for a startup. But he just had this vision from the very beginning that he was building a team and culture that would withstand all the ups and downs of the product. And he was so invested in that from the onset, and that always really stuck with me. Let's talk about ROI versus impact, and the pursuit of quick wins sometimes getting in the way of long-term potential. It's really interesting how we have this tendency towards dopamine hits, and we want to just make progress. We want to feel like we are solving problems. And so as a result, sometimes we've probably all seen this, where you're on an email chain debating where a logo is positioned or some very small minutia piece of a product when there's some glaring big elephant in the room problem that no one is talking about. Why are we spending so much time on these little nuances when there are bigger problems that we have to actually tackle? And so the thought here is making sure that as we're optimizing our product and our teams, we are also always anchoring ourselves with one of those big, audacious problems, and that we are being annoying about it in a context of a team that by default will probably want small and quick wins, because that's just innately the way we're wired as human beings. Don't ever let those, that pursuit of small problems being solved get in the way of the 1 or 2 big problems that you would solve that no one else can, right? That will ultimately differentiate your product, your team, your process, how you work. My criteria over the years for hiring or investing in a team has evolved, and I would say that now it really comes down to this desire to work with people with whom discussions evolve by a step function. We all meet people all the time, and a lot of people's conversations with you may feel like repeats. Every time you check in, it's like, hey, what's up? How are you doing? Talk about the same sort of thing, even people on your team, the same sort of problem. And then there are some people that have this ability to always build upon the conversation, right? Every conversation you have seems insatiably more interesting. And I think some of those people are the people that make the greatest partners in business and projects and creative projects and endeavors. And when you optimize your team with these kind of builders as opposed to repeaters, you're constantly going to be changing the way that you work and the product that's out there. It's just the nature of the chemistry of a team with people like that. And so I think it's a good litmus test when you're interviewing people or building relationships with people you want to work with over time, whether or not conversations are becoming more interesting by a step function whenever you have them. Let's talk about innovation for a moment. I feel like when you're innovating in that middle and you're trying to find some distinguishing elements that will really make your product or business or project a success. An innovation is an edge that becomes a center, right? And the thing about edges is that they look weird. Take Airbnb, the classic example where someone sleeping in your bed seems so weird to all the investors that met with that team, and they couldn't raise any money until they found someone who was willing to kind of familiarize themselves with this very seemingly unreasonable idea. Reasonable thinking really very much keeps us where we've been. And the funny thing about hiring a team is that we typically try to hire people that we feel are reasonable. You know, that dangerous term culture fit, which is really a term for people that are like me, that I feel like I can think similarly to. It's a dangerous thing because then you ultimately build a team around you that is thinking just like you. And it's really at the edge of reason. When someone says something that strikes you as unreasonable, but then you have so much respect for them and you're curious about their perspective, and then through ongoing discussion, it becomes more familiar, and then you become open to it, and then suddenly it becomes something that the rest of the world says was an obvious step, a major innovation that seems obvious to the rest of us, like all great innovations end up feeling. And so what is the shortcut to stack your team, stack the deck in your favor, or increase your odds? It's simply diversity. It is building a team of people that extraordinarily different, extraordinary people, and making sure that, and it's not just biological checkboxes, and it's just people that have so many different backgrounds, have such a different surface area of experience that they're pulling from. Those are the folks that are collectively more likely to be thinking in an unreasonable way from each other. Everyone's sort of on a different level of where their perspective is, and those clashes of difference end up revealing these edges that then become the center and that keep your innovation fuel there. And so it's super important to build a chemistry that drives that. This diversity sustains the differentiation of whatever your product or service or talent is in your team. But how do you give these unreasonable insights a chance at succeeding, at really actually happening? Because it's one thing to have a great idea like that at the edge, but it's another thing to convince the whole team to pursue it. And actually, if you always rely upon convincing everyone and reaching this sense of consensus, which is such a safe and reliable way to keep everyone happy, you'll never have a chance of really concretely executing an innovation, because again, there will always be some people who don't really get it. And so that notion of valuing conviction over consensus, having a team chemistry where if someone that you really respect, who's an expert in their field, pounds the table and says, I believe in this, do you have a culture where then everyone rallies behind that person? And if you talk to, again, a lot of groups of investors, they'll talk about some of their greatest investments being situations where there wasn't consensus about making that investment, but there was conviction. You hear the same thing about major product breakthroughs within companies. People were very doubtful, but there was one person positioned the right way with the right credibility who just pounded the table. And so it's important to remember that these greatest breakthroughs come from non-obvious insights, and these reasonable minds will not engage very quickly. You have to have that conviction and value it and empower it. When we are building products, one of the most common challenges that I see in startups is that they are founded by people who are deeply passionate about a solution to a problem, but aren't necessarily empathetic with the customer's suffering from that problem. And so with passion, we gather a team and we sell our story and everything else, and then we end up realizing a couple years from now that, wait, we actually didn't really understand the friction that we were trying to solve. And so the challenge for us as we build products within companies or start our own companies is to make sure we're anchoring ourselves with empathy, for the customers. You can never spend enough time, right? You can never spend enough time with the customers, making sure and rechecking and recalibrating that empathy with what the problem is you're trying to solve. And it's a challenge for all of us because we're creative people and we get fired up by our passion for something we see, and that actually can end up being a hindrance, and we have to make sure that empathy is constantly anchoring us. Let's talk about opportunities. So I get asked a lot by friends about job offers and opportunities that they're pursuing, and it's interesting that so many career decisions are made at face value. The name of the company, the reputation that company currently has at this very moment, which of course, as we know, is liable to change at any moment. Everyone's kind of trying to join something hot. And they forget that great careers are made by joining something cold and making it hot. And so what I advise people to do is to focus more on when they're deciding in opportunities, even within a company, a new vector of innovation you're going to pursue, or a job you're going to take, or a client you're going to choose to work with versus not choose to work with. So to focus on where the learning curve will be steepest. And also always having that edict, right? That you want to join a team not just for what it is, but for what you believe that you can make it become. And that requires a good sense of the value you bring. And when you're looking at an opportunity, don't just look for something where you think that will look great on a business card, it will be a good headline, and you'll be proud to tell your friends. Look for a hole that you feel you can fill. I mean, really look for something in a company or in a client where you're like, I'm the perfect person for that. And I really believe, and I've seen so many examples of this, especially writing this book, of people who, that was their main criteria. And at first people may have said to them, why are you taking that opportunity? That doesn't seem so hot. And they're like, you know what, because it's perfect for me. And then they made it into something even grander.